You probably have a hunch about this AI pattern. A new tool launches, it does something genuinely mind-blowing. Everyone else then share it, lose their mind and sleep over it. And then a few months later, you realize you entirely forgot about it until you read it again in the news. Sora is the extreme case of it. It's the most impressive AI demo of 2025. However, there was only 1% of retention left after 30 days, with $15 million a day to keep the lights on. Now, OpenAI has finally pulled the plug. I'm going to walk you through the specific ways Sora failed, tells you exactly what is going to separate the AI companies or products that survive 2026 from the ones that quietly disappear, including probably a few that you're relying on right now. Sora's Obituary isn't a technology failure, but a business one. And OpenAI's own leadership made that pretty clear. Days after the shutdown, Fiji Simo, she's the OpenAI CEO of applications, held an all-hands and told staff the company is orienting aggressively towards highly productive use cases. What she said here is, our opportunity now is to take those 900 million users and turn them into high compute users, said by Simo, according to a transcription reported by WSJ. She also said, we will do that by transforming ChatGPT into a productivity tool. Here's the translation, the stuff that actually makes money. So the question shouldn't be why Sora died, but you should ask, what was broken so badly that the most well-funded AI company on earth looked at its most viral product and said, this isn't worth keeping alive anymore? And when you're going through this autopsy with me, you will see these 3 exact load-bearing fractures from day 1. Sora's autopsy, 3 fractures. Fracture number 1, jaw-dropping cost. Forbes estimated that for every 10 seconds of Sora clips, it costs OpenAI about $1.30. That actually doesn't sound much until you realize what happens at scale. In a normal software company, what happens is every new users you acquire makes your unit cost goes down. And that's the whole internet era playbook. Build it once, serve it to millions, and the marginal cost approaches 0. Sora, however, ran in a complete opposite direction because every new user Sora acquires makes the cost goes up. Now, more clips, more compute, more bleeding. At peak, they had 9 million of downloads with only $1.4 million in total earnings. That means every dollar someone spends on Sora, roughly 7 people used it for free. If you multiplied the numbers across a million of users every day, assuming that they all generate only 1 clip every day, and that's $1.3 per clip, and then you will hit something about $15 million per day spending already. But if you multiply that even further into an annual spend, and then we will be looking at $5 billion of annual spending. So at best, Sora earned in 6 months of what it cost in a few days. Makes it a net $4 to $5 billion lost business. And OpenAI knew it because very soon they slashed free generations from 30 a day down to 5. But these kind of cuts actually pushed more users out of the door because users, they do have other options. There are really capable Chinese models, or there are models done by Google can generate these kind of clips for you too. So they were stuck. Either they have to subsidize usage and bleed money, or they have to cut the usage and bleed users. And that's fracture 1. But the cost problem only matters if people are actually sticking around, and they weren't. Now, fracture number 2, too much, wow, but not enough product market fit. So the cost problem only matters if people are actually using the product. And the retention data tells you they weren't, not even close. This is a graph of Sora's retention next to TikTok's. The black line is Sora just to make it easier to compare. Here are some key retention points in the table I made. Honestly, I am really generous in the comparison because TikTok is actually a matured app. The fact that a brand new product that generated so much noise when they were doing the demo from the most hyped AI companies on earth couldn't hold up 10% of the users past day 1. It says everything. They had 10 million of people downloaded Sora. However, within 30 days, 99% of them were gone. It was also a record on its own. But here's an even more interesting question, is that we should ask what users were doing while they were still on Sora. Actually, when most people open Sora, they type something stupid like Pikachu skateboards through a volcano, found it cute and sent it to a group chat, and that was it. That was the entire user journey, because nobody was coming back next day to make another one of these. People get bored of these very quickly. The novelty wore off in a few sessions. And this is actually the exact problem most people misunderstood. People were often confused about between what I would call product wow versus product market fit. So product wow typically means people go, that's incredible, and then decide to share it with a friend. However, when we're talking about product market fit, it means people will come back daily, weekly, and so on because you solve a critical problem in their life and they find your product super valuable. So in short, wow is a moment, fit is a habit. Sora was exactly a product wow. Here's a quick way for you to tell the difference between two AI products. Simply ask yourself, how would you feel if you could no longer use the product? And then the next layer, ask yourself again, how much would you pay to not lose the access to the product? If the answer is, I'll be very disappointed if I can't use it, or even I will pay X, any number above 0, you've got a real product market fit. Though in Sora's case, they didn't even need the survey because 99% of the users answered that questions within the first 30 days by not coming back. Fracture 3, the copyright shackles. So the unit economics were broken and no one was coming back, but Sora had a third problem. When Sora just launched, the content that went most viral was all the stuff that used characters people already knew, really familiar with. So you see video generated based on Marvel heroes or Disney princesses. That wasn't an accident. Those clips spread much faster because people knew that men cared about those characters. It was Sora's best growth engine. However, this cuts both ways because none of those IP actually belongs to OpenAI. You might have heard of how Disney actually tried to make this work. In December 25, they signed a $1 billion 3-year license deal with OpenAI, so that the 200 characters across Disney, Marvel, Pixar, and Star Wars could finally be officially available on Sora. It was supposed to be a role model of how AI companies and IP holders finally get to coexist. However, you could also imagine when OpenAI killed Sora soon after, naturally the deal just collapsed. So until now, every fracture I mentioned was basically a different way of the logic screamed, this cannot be scaled. So Sora was just never going to work. However, OpenAI kept it running for more than 6 months anyways. So what finally forced the decision? Pressure number 1, OpenAI's burn rate. Let's start with the money. OpenAI has been around since 2015. In that time, they've shipped dozens of products and invested in nearly 20 startups. That cost a lot. In 2025, OpenAI made around $13 billion in revenue, but they also lost roughly $9 billion in the same year. And their own internal projections shows that in 2026, the losses will hit around $14 billion. Here's a table of a quick estimation of their net losses between 25 and 26. So you see that OpenAI is spending roughly $1.5 for every dollar it earns. And no one, not even Sam Altman himself, has a firm answer on when the ratio will flip. At this burn rate, especially when companies like Amazon or Meta, they have actual profitable businesses, are already raising debts to fund their AI venture, OpenAI really has no choice but to start cutting. So Sora, high cost, near zero revenue with no user retention was a really obvious target. However, it's not the financial pressure alone that killed Sora. Something else was happening at the same time. Pressure number 2, Anthropic is devouring OpenAI's lunch. So the second pressure here is the competition. I built this dashboard, link in the description, using Ramp's corporate spending data to show what's actually happening. Now, if you look at the first chart, when a company buys AI for the first time, Who did they pick? In March 24, there was still 82% choose OpenAI. However, there was only 13% that went with Anthropic. However, by February 26, those lines just crossed. Anthropic now is at 65%, whereas OpenAI is only at 32%. Most analysis stops here. However, on this channel, we look at what's underneath the number because the change in speed is what matters here. From August 2025, OpenAI dropped from 77% to 68% in a single month. Then it falls off a cliff, 68 to 32 in 3 months, while the new buyers of Anthropic AI goes from 21% to 65% in the same window. Now, the switch rate, i.e. the companies that were already with OpenAI decided to leave for their competitors, is 10 times higher than 2 years ago. And this isn't just startups, because with enterprise and mid-sized markets that you see the exact same pattern across the board. 6 months ago, the revenue gaps between OpenAI and Anthropic was 16 billion. Now, it's 6 billion. At this rate, Anthropic is going to catch up with OpenAI even before the end of the year. It's really hard not to panic if you're Altman. So if they didn't pull the plug of Sora, that means every dollar spent prepping up Sora is going to be every dollar not spent fighting Anthropic on this enterprise front, where the users actually pay. Pressure number 3, IPO pressure. The Wall Street wants a clean story. And then here's IPO. At the beginning of this year, OpenAI just raised $100 billion at the valuation of more than $800 billion. They're also reportedly targeting a public listing at the end of this year at up to $1 trillion valuation. For them to go public for a $1 trillion valuation, they will need a really clean growth trajectory. High burn product, however, with no path to monetization during their preparation for an IPO, it just feels like a limb for them to amputate. So now, OpenAI's strategy is crystal clear. 3 of them. First, kill the side quest and focus on the main one. Basically, it's them playing catch up on the desktop super apps, integrating ChatGPT, Codex, and browser. And second, the same story, but with agentic system, automatic AI agents for enterprise via the super app. And their last strategy is to continue with the long-term R&D, robotic, and the world models. Everything else is expendable. How AI startups actually now enter the show me the money era. So Sora failed on cost retention and on IP. These are actually 3 different symptoms of the same disease. The product never answered the only question that matters. Who pays you, how much, and why now? If any fancy AI demo cannot answer those 3 questions, they have no business. They are just a magic trick that dies the minute the show ends. Most AI companies right now subsidizing usage with investors' cash and call it transactions. What's worse, the people deciding how to spend those money actually have very little personal downside if it doesn't work out. The investors, however, and the society absorb the cost, while the decision makers move on to the next company. On the other hand, AI companies that are actually making money right now aren't building the most impressive demos. They're solving specific, boring, recurring problems that everyone will pay to fix on a regular basis. Sora was the most impressive AI demo of 2025, and now it's dead. Unfortunately, that's probably an answer that many will not learn. But when AI capital winter is approaching, the only way to survive is really to make every single dollar count. So if any one AI company doesn't adjust, they will learn the lesson the hard way. Because when all bubbles pop and all illusions shatter, what remains standing won't be the coolest technology, but the business that actually creates value, as we've seen in many technology boom-bust cycles. So in 2026, the only way for those AI companies to survive is to make sure every dollar counts. Now, click on this list and watch more of the product breakdown.